Hello and welcome everybody. I see the attendee numbers are slowly going up at the moment. So as you join us, I hope you're all keeping well and your plans for your Oxford MBA journey this September are coming together nicely. There's lots going on at the school, as I'm sure there are in your world. So I know it's a busy time. So thank you so much for joining us for this exclusive session with Rachel Botsman today. And for those of you that don't know me or haven't spoken to before, my name is Corinne Young and I'm one of the MBA recruitment and admissions managers at the school. And we also have Francisca von Horn in the background helping with the session and typing away to some of the questions that may come in later today. So the session today is around 30 minutes long. So we'll have an interview with Rachel at the start of that and then some Q&A from yourselves. So please do type these into the Q&A box as we go along so that we've got some questions to ask Rachel for the second half of the session today. So Rachel is on the screen with us, as you can see. So Rachel Botsman is a leading expert on trust in the modern world. So Rachel is a trust fellow here at the Side Business School in Oxford, where she designs and teaches courses on trust and technology. These include the Oxford MBA electives Trust in the Digital Age and the Collaborative Economy. She also is an advisor to boards, senior leaders and governments all across the world and helping organisations to create trustworthy cultures. She's also the author of 2 critically acclaimed books, What's Mine is Yours and Who Can You Trust? And her TED Talks have been viewed more than 4 million times. She's also been recognised as one of the top 10 most influential voices in the UK on LinkedIn. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you join us today, Rachel, and to speak to our incoming female MBA students.
It's a pleasure to be here. I also drink an extraordinary amount of tea, which is why you'll see me drinking about my 5th cup. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So we've got some pre-planned questions today, Rachel, so I'd like to go straight into those. So you were a student at Oxford. So how much have things changed since you were studying here?
So I was a student in, I nearly said 1966 to 1999. And one of the things I love about Oxford is it's a rare place in the world where it feels like it's caught in a time warp. So I walk around and the pubs haven't changed. The kebab vans are still the same. I think most of the clubs are still the same. It feels like the same place of history and learning. And even now, you know, I'm sort of in teaching role and not student role. I see in them the experience I had in myself where, you know, I always joke my husband that the best 3 years of my life were my student years at Oxford. He wasn't involved in that. That's why we joke about it. But it's just an incredible place where you feel this sense that people have been learning here over time, and that's very hard to describe until you are here. And then the other thing I love about Oxford is that you have the proximity to London, you have this vibrant city, but then you're surrounded by this countryside and this openness. And I know that sounds like a funny thing to mention, but I think it really shapes the experience here, that you can taste, you can be on the river in the morning and then you can be in the lecture hall in the afternoon, and that really hasn't changed.
That's fantastic. And I know the atmosphere and the kind of array of activities you can get involved in at Oxford makes it such a unique place as well. So, and Rachel, I know you weren't a business student, so you've studied fine art. So for you, how did fine art lead you to explore and write about big sociological ideas like trust?
Yeah, so I studied fine art. The art school here is called the Ruskin. It was a last minute switch. So I had actually set the entrance exam to read law, and then decided it wasn't for me, because I've always been, not that the law isn't sort of creative, but a very visual person. And the thing I actually had this experience of studying fine art was that what I enjoyed doing was understanding human connections, understanding why people respond in certain situations and certain things. Now, at the time I was making art and really examining that response, but that curiosity around human connection and behavior, I think, really formed, and I realized that when I was at Oxford. I then went to Harvard, and I actually spent a year at the business school, and I really struggled there, which is a whole other conversation, and ended up at the Kennedy School. And at the Kennedy School was very lucky to start working with these pretty well-known professors that studied social movements. So this was pre-social media, pre-platforms, but how do you mobilize people? How do you get groups of people to either align around something or to believe in something? And that was sort of the journey into this space. Long story short, I ended up working for President Clinton when he left office in the very early days when he started his foundation. And this was when Hillary was first running against Obama in the first election. And they realized back then that what would beat them was technology, that Obama's team understood how technology would mobilize people, would change the way people received information, would change fundraising. And I became completely fascinated by this. And the way I work is I sort of have this hunch that something very big is changing, but there's a paradigm shift going on. And that research led to my first book in the sharing economy. And, you know, when I wrote it in 2008, to give you a perspective on it, I opened with the story of Airbnb, which was 18 months old. And there was only 10 people working in that company. And the piece that always fascinated me was how strangers could trust one another. And so it was a journey. It was a journey that started, you know, over 12 years ago into this huge and fascinating topic of trust, who we trust, how we trust, why we trust, the role trust plays in our lives, what happens when we don't trust ourselves, when trust breaks down. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is that it is the social glue of any organization. So it doesn't matter if you're a startup launching a new product or you're a leader of a massive business. I believe if you don't understand trust, it's actually a skill and a lens that is missing in terms of, you know, why does that product succeed or fail? Why does that team believe in me? Why do we have issues with our culture? Understanding trust gives you a perspective on all these things.
Mm-hmm. Completely. That's fascinating, especially to hear about your work with the Clintons as well. So thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And you've alluded to my next question as well. So your resume is slightly unconventional for an academic.
It
is. With your books, your TED Talks, the podcast series you have, your newsletter, the online courses, the list really does go on. So why do you work in so many mediums? And do you think that this has given you a different approach to your teaching style?
Yeah, I have never been asked that question. I think my passion, and I'm not just saying this, my passion is learning, right? And when you start to really understand a subject, you have to push yourself to not keep being curious about it, but to understand it in new ways. And when you push yourself into a new medium, like a podcast, for example, and you hear perspectives from, you know, I interviewed Ant Middleton, who does SAS, Who Dares Wins, all the way through to Adam Grant, who's a very respected psychologist, and you hear their perspectives on the topic, you start to think of, well, why didn't I see it that way? Or it triggers all these questions. And I think that sort of always believing you can learn through different mediums and questioning is what I think I take into the design of my teaching, which, you know, I hope, and students tell me, is very experiential and highly interactive. So I always say to my students at the start of term, you know, if you're not confused at some point, if you're not angry with me, if you don't disagree with me, if you're not uncomfortable in yourself, something's gone wrong in this learning experience that we're meant to have together, because I think you learn the most when you are uncomfortable, and you learn the most when you do feel slightly confused. And a lot of teaching is actually in that sort of very linear consumption of content, very prescriptive. Now I'm going to teach you 10 things. And that plays a role, right? In finance, you need to understand the principles of finance. But I think with behavioral sciences, there's a real opportunity to help people reflect and think about the things that they want to develop and the things that they want to change in themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, thank you. And I like what you say there about you learn the most when you are uncomfortable, when you are challenged. And I know that's come through many of the conversations that we've had through the interview process, actually, with the incoming class. There's probably a few people on the line that have spoken directly to us about this. So that's fantastic to hear. So Rachel, why did you return to university to become a lecturer and teacher?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I always, I didn't wake up, I sort of had this hunch that I really enjoyed teaching. And I should say, like, I'm not a traditional academic researcher at the university, but I have a real passion for the design of courses and the design of learning experiences. And there was a woman who used to run the Skoll Centre at the SAI Business School called Pamela Hartigan, a wonderful woman. And I think it started because she saw me give a presentation. She saw me give a presentation at the World Economic Forum, and she said, "I think you are a teacher." And this was very Pamela, if anyone knew Pamela, and she used to have these very strong instincts about people. "Oh, you should come and teach at Oxford." And I was like, well, I've never taught anyone in my life. And she said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll teach you that bit." And so that led to the first course that we designed on the collaborative economy, that was very different to the second course. And then sort of through life events, my whole family ended up moving here. And the school, I think, recognized how important trust is in the world today, and said it would be really great if you wanted to join, which was a very brave decision, because I don't fit the typical professor stereotype. So it was, so that I've been, I think, now on the faculty for 18 months, but at the school for over 5 years.
That's great, and we're honoured to have you with us, Rachel, so thank you for sharing that. And so as a teacher and lecturer at the business school, what do you hope that your students would take away from your sessions?
So one of the things I'm very conscious of, and I actually start my courses here, is I want to understand why people are in the room. This is really important to me. So if I think about the students I just had in my last class, I think it was 80 students I taught virtually. There were some people in there because they really wanted to understand the relationship between trust and technology, because they were going into that sector, and they were looking for quite practical strategic advice. There were other people in there because they were really passionate about leadership and culture. And then another cohort that were really interested in design and how you can design for trust. And so one of the things I try to do as a teacher is, once I know that, is to make sure each of those groups feel like they get what they've come for. And I'm very clear at signaling at the start of class, for all those who are interested in design, this is the class really for you. But for those who are not, you must stick with it, because this is where you might learn. So that's sort of like on the content level. And then I think experientially, I hope people discover a different way to think. So we do a lot of visual representation of ideas, because trust is such an abstract concept. So I'm always getting the students to, when they can't articulate something, could you draw it? Or what does it look like? Or does it live on a 4x4? And so a lot of students come out and they say, this is the first type of visual thinking that I've ever done. so I think beyond the content itself, I think there's something in the tools and the templates that I give that help students think about how they learn, and when they tune out and when they're really engaged, and it's quite self-reflective in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, thank you. And you alluded to that you've been teaching virtually online. So the Trust in the Digital Age course that you teach for the MBA, you've been teaching for about 3 years now, I believe. So this is the first time it's completely been done virtually. So how have you found that virtual format of teaching, and how has it worked this year on the MBA?
So I'm surprised at the things that work exceptionally well, and then where we have a lot to learn. So, you know, I just finished marking all the students' assignments. So I can tell in terms of key concepts and key ideas, so how you typically measure learning, there is very little difference, right? So I think they actually took away all the content and key points. I think one of the hardest things that I am really learning how to recreate is the conversation that happens in the classroom, but also, you know, in the breaks and when people bump into you in the hallways. And breakout rooms are great for that, but that's where I'm starting to really experiment with my teaching. I actually did like office hours with smaller groups, because I was very conscious of students that, you know, in the classroom, it can be really nervous to raise your hand. I remember being at Harvard, and at Harvard, I failed a course because I literally felt sick. It was in game theory of raising my hand. And whenever I look at a student, I think, I know you have something to say. Why are you not saying it? I know because you're telling me this over email, or you're coming up to me after class. I go back to that feeling I had as a student who was too frightened to put their hand up because they were scared of what the rest of the class would think of them. And that can be really amplified in virtual environments, because everyone can see your question if you type it in chat. So I've been figuring out different ways to collect questions, so that people feel heard. And that, I think, is the hardest thing, is the inclusivity that you really want in a classroom, and how you replicate that in a virtual environment. We had a lot of fun, I have to tell you. Like, it was, I think in some ways many of the students were more present and they were more there than in the physical classroom, but we were very conscious of energy and breaks, and we, you know, took a break every 20 minutes, and some of them played their musical instruments and sang to each other, and we really tried to work with the experience versus trying to replicate what happened in the classroom, the physical classroom.
Great. It sounds like you found lots of great ways to kind of include people, and with the smaller teaching methods, which is something we're looking at expanding into Michaelmas term with the Oxford tutorial system, and having more of those smaller intimate sessions where you can allow yourself to have those more honest and deeper conversations in that small group for people that are, you know, fearful of raising their hand, like you say, in a full lecture theatre.
Yeah, I have to say, one of my favorite things about the Oxford experience is the tutorial system, because I think we don't give students enough permission to actually say, I don't understand. And particularly, I think within an MBA cohort, like, there is a lot of people are competitive by nature, you know, there is that. So having the confidence to say, actually, I don't understand, that really is a tutorial. A really good tutorial should be allow you to do that.
Completely. And we can't not ask around a question around COVID today, because it tends to come up in every session. So with the current pandemic, which has created such an uncertain future for business leaders and industries worldwide, what do you think is the most important thing that universities and an MBA can equip students with for navigating the coming years and that uncertainty?
Resilience. I think it's actually two things. I think it's resilience and empathy. So I personally, and I'm not saying this, and no one told me to say this, I think it's a very not exciting, interesting time to embark on an MBA, because we are going to see a whole new type of leadership emerge after this crisis, compassionate leadership, and to have a year to really reflect on the type of leader you want to be, I think is a huge privilege and opportunity. But yeah, I think the traits that we look for in the people that we hire, the traits that we look for in the people that we listen to, are going to completely change. And empathy and compassion, you know, are absolutely key. And then I think resilience, whether that's strategically, how do you be resilient, and then, you know, culture-wise, how do you build a resilient culture so that you're not sort of denying the uncertainty, or you're not acknowledging how hard it is for people, but you know you've got people that can cope with it, which is, I'm hearing from many organizations, people are just paralyzed. So I think they're the two things.
Great advice, thank you so much. And so we're into the next part now, Rachel, where we're asked for some questions to come through from the audience. So please do keep your questions coming in via the Q&A box of anything you'd like to ask Rachel today. I'd like to kick off with the first question from Anastasia. Would you say that trust is more about knowing or feeling?
Well, it's a really good question, and I don't know if the question is about heart or head. So I don't know if the question is actually about, do you make good trust decisions based on your head and information, or your gut? If that's where the question is coming from. So I'll answer that question, and then I'll answer, it could be the other way. You know, very often when you ask people who've made a bad trust decision, so when you've given our trust the wrong person, the common response you'll hear is, well, I just felt like it was intuition. I had this instinct that I could trust them, and that I haven't actually had enough information. It's something, you know, I've become much more aware of in myself, that if you're making a big decision and it's a high value, high risk decision, you get as much information as possible, even if your gut is telling you something. The other way, the question where it might have been coming from, the very essence of trust is actually not knowing. The role trust plays in our lives is that it allows us to navigate the unknown, to cope with uncertainty. If you know the outcome of something, if you know how someone will behave, very little trust is required. The more unknowns there are, the more trust that is needed. So trust is very much about the unknown, not the known.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And Joe has asked a question which builds on this, actually. So the question is, why do strangers trust each other, and especially in those situations like Airbnb?
Oh, it's such, well, you have to take the course to understand that question. But you know, I think the positive side of society, well, actually it's biological, is that we're naturally trusting human beings. Like, you know, we would have never left the cave. So I think we know biologically that we have to trust strangers. So most people, it's not a case of distrust, it's often a case of ambivalence or lack of trust when they meet someone that they don't know. So it's human instinct to actually be able to trust people we don't know. But the remarkable thing in the instance of technology is, what technology does is you think about all the things you can actually know about someone, you know, who they know that you know, their past reputation through ratings and reviews. So what it's doing is it's allowing you to sort of form expectations about that person, which is really important for trust.
Thank you for that. And another question, Rachel, is, who has been your biggest supporter throughout your life so far? And is that in the form of a mentor or coach, or a more personal supporter to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one person. I personally believe, I don't usually use the word mentor, but like champions, people that really believe in you, that can see something in you that maybe you can't see in yourself. And they've changed for me, right? Because you've been in very different life stages and career stages. So Pamela is a great example of that, right? I didn't go out and seek Pamela, but there was a very natural connection, and she saw that I could teach. I have worked with people, and along, you know, I'm very lucky in my work that I've had interactions and been on the stage with people, and they're not people I interact with on a daily or even monthly basis, like Elizabeth Gilbert or Esther Perel or Adam, who I mentioned. And they've all had a profound influence on me because they've said something about my work, or they've said something about themselves, and that has led to something important, whether it be a change of direction or a new decision or a new body of work. So I've never really had a mentor as such. It's more people that recognize something or see something in you in your work that then propel you forward in a different direction, that I think are sometimes undervalued, versus people who give you advice.
Sure, thank you for that. And what would you say has been the proudest moment in your career so far, if you can choose one?
I don't know. That's it's really tricky. I think you have moments where you sort of look around and you think, oh, not really sure how I got here. Like, not like, oh, I don't deserve to be here. Like, I've worked really hard for this. But, you know, I remember being on stage at the World Economic Forum, and, you know, I had the CEO of Google on my left, and I had Mark Benioff on my right, and they're looking at you for answers, and you're live on CNN and being moderated by the New York Times, right? And that's a pretty high pressure situation. You can't really mess up. And then you think, oh, I'm okay up here. I'm okay. And that's, there's pride in that, right? Like, there's pride in, as I said, going into situations that are really stressful and uncomfortable and realizing you're okay. I think that's always where I felt the pride, versus, you know, it's nice to win awards and get recognition, but that sort of that feeling disappears really quickly. But the feeling that you can cope with something and are capable of something, and that you've left an impact with people, like that's the stuff that really sticks with you.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think we've got time for one more question today. So a question from Martina here. So, being a young, successful female leader, have you experienced lack of trust in your expertise, despite of your rich experience, because of some unconscious bias?
Yeah, but I use it to my advantage. I'm very aware that people probably see a female first. I think when people tell me they think I'm a bit younger than I actually am, which I take as a compliment, but is often not meant as a compliment. And so the advantage of that is you're quite unassuming to people. You're not a threat. And therefore you can take people to unexpected places. I find this a lot actually with boards and male leaders in particular, but also female leaders. Like, common feedback is no one's ever said that in that room. Like, no one, and I think being female is part of that power, that people don't quite know what to expect of you, or maybe they underestimate you, and you can use that power, because it is power, to your advantage. I think the one area where it's been a struggle is, you know, I once gave an event to a very senior group of bankers, and was told in the briefing to be very direct about what I thought about trust in financial services. And I was very direct that day. And on the feedback form, people said, oh, I thought she'd be less aggressive. So, you know, this is a continual challenge you know, what I see as being direct and assertive can be perceived as aggressive, and that is a reality that we sort of have to accept. But I don't invest a lot of time in being angry or anxious about it. I sort of just accept it for what it is. It's not noise in my head. I use it and I work through it, and then it can be a very powerful thing.
That's great, thank you, and some good advice there to take away for some of the people on the call today. So thank you so much for that, Rachel. And I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time today, but it's been an honour to speak to you, and it's been really insightful. So thank you so much for being open with your responses to us today and answering some great questions. So thank you, Rachel, very much for your time, and thank you to everyone that's joined us on the line today. We look forward to speaking to you and continuing this journey with you over the next couple of months before you start your Oxford MBA. So thank you to everyone today, and have a good afternoon and evening wherever you are. Thank you.